to the Daily Bite. I'm your host, Pastor Steve Andrews. Today we study from 2 Samuel chapter 24. We finished the book. Again, the anger of Yahweh was kindled against Israel, and he incited David against them, saying, "Go number Israel and Judah." So the king said to Joab, the commander of the army who was with him, "Go through all the tribes of Israel from Dan to Beersheba, and number the people, that I may know the number of the people." But Joab said to the king, "May Yahweh your God add to the people 100 times as many as they are, while the eyes of my lord the king still see it. But why does my lord the king delight in this thing?" But the king's word prevailed against Joab and the commanders of the army. So Joab and the commanders of the army went out from the presence of the king to number the people of Israel. They crossed the Jordan and began from Aroer, and from the city that is in the middle of the valley, toward Gad and on to Jazer. Then they came to Gilead and to Kadesh in the land of the Hittites, and they came to Dan, and from Dan they went around to Sidon, and came to the fortress of Tyre, and to all the cities of the Hivites and the Canaanites. And they went out to the Negev of Judah at Beersheba. So when they had gone through all the land, they came to Jerusalem at the end of 9 months and 20 days. And Joab gave the sum of the numbering of the people to the king. In Israel there were 800,000 valiant men who drew the sword, and the men of Judah were 500,000. But David's heart struck him after he had numbered the people, and David said to Yahweh, "I have sinned greatly in what I have done. But now, O Yahweh, please take away the iniquity of your servant, for I have done very foolishly." And when David arose in the morning, the word of Yahweh came to the prophet Gad, David's seer, saying, "Go and say to David, Thus says Yahweh, 3 things I offer to you. Choose one of them, that I may do it to you." So Gad came to David and told him, and said to him, "Shall 3 years of famine come to you in your land? Or will you flee 3 months before your foes, while they pursue you? Or shall there be 3 days' pestilence in your land? Now consider and decide what answer I shall return to him who sent me." Then David said to Gad, "I am in great distress. Let us fall into the hand of Yahweh, for his mercy is great, but let me not fall into the hand of man." So Yahweh sent a pestilence on Israel from the morning until the appointed time, and there died of the people from Dan to Beersheba 70,000 men. And when the angel stretched out his hand toward Jerusalem to destroy it, Yahweh relented from the calamity, and said to the angel who was working destruction among the people, "It is enough. Now stay your hand." And the angel of Yahweh was by the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. Then David spoke to Yahweh when he saw the angel who was striking the people, and said, "Behold, I have sinned, and I have done wickedly. But these sheep, what have they done? Please let your hand be against me and against my father's house." And Gad came that day to David and said to him, "Go up, raise an altar to Yahweh on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite." So David went up at Gad's word, as Yahweh commanded, and when Araunah looked down, he saw the king and his servants coming on toward him. And Araunah went out and paid homage to the king with his face to the ground. And Araunah said, "Why has my lord the king come to his servant?" David said, "To buy the threshing floor from you, in order to build an altar to Yahweh, that the plague may be averted from the people." Then Araunah said to David, "Let my lord the king take and offer up what seems good to him. Here are the oxen for the burnt offering, and the threshing sledges, and the yokes of the oxen for the wood. All this, O king," Araunah gives to the king. And Araunah said to the king, "May Yahweh your God accept you." But the king said to Araunah, "But I will buy it from you for a price. I will not offer burnt offerings to Yahweh my God that cost me nothing." So David bought the threshing floor and the oxen for 50 shekels of silver. And David built there an altar to Yahweh, and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. So Yahweh responded to the plea for the land, and the plague was averted from Israel. This is the word of the Lord. The beginning of this chapter, well, really there's a couple of things in this chapter that probably cause the regular Christian reader some difficulties. The first is the idea that God incited David in verse 1. Now we have to remember God's judgment is just, and that the punishment for any sin is damnation. So even one sin is enough. That's something we always have to keep in mind. We have to remember just how grievous our sin truly is. And so God is kindled against Israel because of sin, because of unrepentance. And so he has the authority, he has the right to enact judgment. That 70,000 men are about to die is his divine right of judgment. He could have judged them before, he could have judged them later. He chose to judge them in that one particular moment, just as he has a set time when he will judge you. And it's really up to the Lord if he wants to do it today or tomorrow or whenever. We're thankful for the work of Jesus, which spares us from the judgment, that when we come to that judgment, we are declared innocent. But there is still the consequence of our sin, and we see that in this text as well. But that God incited David is probably even more challenging for many. So this is not unlike the idea from back in 1 Samuel, where God sent the evil spirit upon Saul. The Lutheran Study Bible even goes as far as to suggest that this was God sending Satan to tempt David. The text doesn't say. Instead, God incites David against them, that is Israel. He is using David here as an instrument of judgment on his people. And yet, nonetheless, what David himself is about to do is a sin. Joab gets it. We have seen some great evil from Joab, and we've also seen some great good from Joab. He really does seem to go both ways here. He understands that the census is a really bad idea. Now, this is a question to discuss as a family. Why is a census a bad idea? Why is it sinful for David to want to know how many people are in Israel? The idea here is about trust. This is an opportunity to reflect and summarize again to see if you can recall times where God worked victory for his people regardless of the odds or the numbers. You can come up with them from David's life. We just read several of them yesterday in the accounts of the mighty men. We have David against Goliath as another example. A couple of chapters ago, we had the 4 giants that were slain. We have the book of Judges. I mean, just any account from that, pretty much. But you can think of maybe in particular, I believe it was Gideon going up with 300 men who had lapped the water against, I think it was 135,000 Midianites. And not a single one of the 300 died, and they were victorious. Why? Because God fought for them. David, it doesn't matter how many people you have. Trust in the Lord. He will provide. He will care for you. That's the point. That's what needs to be realized by David. And Joab's response here, may Yahweh your God add to the people 100 times. It's similar to what Nathan the prophet had said to David back in chapter 12, verse 8, the punishment with the account of Bathsheba. God had spoken and said, if you wanted more, I would have added more to you. Trust in God. He will provide for his people. So Joab and the other army commanders go out and do the census. We see in verse 5, they start out east of the Jordan River, just south of the Jabbok. They work their way through Gilead, which is the region to the east of the Jordan. They come back across the Jordan to Kadesh, which is just west of the Sea of Galilee. And then they head northward. They go to Dan, which is the northernmost part of the land of Israel. And then they head west from there over to the Mediterranean Sea, where you'd find Sidon and Tyre. And then from there, they go all the way clear south to the bottom of the nation, straight past Jerusalem, for the end of the census. 9 months and 20 days. Long time. Work and a lot of travel. 1.3 million men in Israel. David then realizes his sin, seeks to repent of his sin, and what we get ends up being a very similar, once again, to chapter 12 with the account of Bathsheba. David gets to pick his punishment here. So sin is forgiven, but consequences for sin remain. And again, that consequence for this sin in particular is actually the judgment God was planning to issue anyway. And so David is going to fervently pray for mercy. He's going to put his trust in God at this point, which is good. But the three options, David looks at them and says, the third option is the one that puts us in the hand of God. Now, God is more powerful. God could obviously wreak a lot more damage on Israel than the Philistines could, for example. But David chooses to trust in God, and he puts himself and his people under God's hand, trusting that the Lord will be merciful rather than allowing himself and his people to be falling into the hands of an enemy who will do who knows what to them. So there's trust there. That's a good thing. Trusting in his mercy, just as he did when he was hearing from Nathan the prophet of the death of his son, that he spent those 7 days in prayer, hoping that his son would be spared. The angel of Yahweh causes the destruction. It is possible that's a pre-incarnate Christ reference, as the angel of Yahweh in the Old Testament often is a discussion of the pre-incarnate Christ. Don't know for sure, but if it is, we remember that Jesus is in charge. Jesus is God, and he is also then the judge. So he has the authority to do this as well. David then builds an altar at Gad's instruction. An altar is a place to offer up offerings. And so he does. And he doesn't want to simply do it for free. Araunah offered everything that was needed, and David said that I will not offer burnt offerings to Yahweh my God that cost me nothing. Because at that point, they're not really an offering. Offerings are sacrifices. And by the very word sacrifices, we think of it, it means you've given up something. You've lost. You've been hurt in some way. And David knows this. He realizes this. So he pays the cost, which is basically the equivalent of 20 ounces of silver. I didn't look up the going rate for silver today because that changes so much anyway. But this is over £1 worth of silver that David pays for the sacrifice. So the plague is averted. It is removed from the people. And we've come to the end of the book. So David's life is coming to its close and has been, and we are going to see Solomon take over at the start of the book of Kings. Now, in terms of our study together, that's not our next move. We are headed towards Isaiah tomorrow. The Lord be with you.